As a matter of fact, I've had many people come back, hundreds of people come back from my seminars and say that idea changed their whole career, changed their whole business, changed their whole family life, changed many, many aspects of their life. All right, now the second method that I want to teach you is a method that you can use by yourself, but you can also use it with groups. You can also use it as a sort of a form of group problem solving, and it's a systematic method, part of which was developed at Harvard University, and part of which was developed by a series of other creative thinkers and in think tanks, and which I've combined into one method. This method is absolutely amazing. It's like firing a cannon at tissue paper. I have never seen a problem that cannot be dealt with this simple method. All right, it's got about 9 steps. Step number 1, starting point, is confident expectations. Confident expectations seems to open up the mind, relax the right brain, activate the superconscious, and seems to tune you in to solving a problem or difficulty at a higher level. So confident expectations are very simple. Assume a logical solution. Whenever you're faced with any kind of difficulty, assume a logical, workable solution. Say to yourself, well, there's a logical, workable solution here. No problem. As it says, what does the Australians say? No worry, mate. Just say the same thing. No worry, mate. No problem. There's got to be a solution here somewhere. This attitude of confident expectations seems to open up the creative mind and make it work far, far better. Step number 2, in order to keep your mind positive and optimistic, use positive language. Use positive language. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, there are certain words in the English language or any language that can raise or lower blood temperature, that cause us to be anxious or fearful or happy or elated. So word usage is important. Using the proper words is important. For instance, the word problem. The word problem is a negative word. It has negative connotations. It causes us to become stressful and anxious and tense. It causes our minds to actually shut down. Instead, use the word situation. Situation, wonderfully enough, is a neutral word. It's neither positive nor negative. A problem is something you struggle with. A situation is something you deal with. Right? Problem equals struggle, setback, cost, difficulty, disappointment. But a situation is just something you deal with. And when you suddenly start describing things as situations, well, we have an interesting situation here. The car has been stolen. Well, this is an interesting situation. Our house is burned down. Well, this is an interesting situation that triggers your mind into dealing with it rather than being overcome by it. Now, a better word, of course, is challenge. And many companies and many individuals now only use the word challenge because it's positive. A challenge is something that you rise to. A challenge is something positive that you rise to. So instead of calling it a problem, call it a challenge. Hey, we have an interesting challenge here, or we're facing some interesting challenges this year. Or it looks like we're going to have challenges that we didn't expect this year, or we've come up with a really big challenge. But a challenge, described as a challenge, is something that brings out the best in you. Your mind starts to race to think how you can deal with it. And best of all is the word opportunity. The word opportunity is a very positive word. The word opportunity is something that you take advantage of. Now, the interesting thing is that in all of our research, we find that within every setback or difficulty, within every problem, within every situation or challenge, there is a hidden opportunity. There is something that you can learn. There's something that you can gain. There's an advantage. There's a benefit. There is something, and we know because of the law of substitution that if we are looking for the opportunity in any situation, we cannot at the same time think about what would cause us to become stressed and anxious. You cannot think of it as a problem and as an opportunity at the same time. The one thought, the positive thought, knocks out the negative thought. So when we look at successful people, we find that successful people are those who keep their minds on what they want, and they look for the opportunity, they look for the challenge, they look for the positive part of any setback or difficulty. Remember, we talked about the superconscious mind, is that setbacks and difficulties very often come to us to tell us to change course or direction, to get onto the right track, to get to where we're going. So instead of becoming frustrated or upset, let's look upon it as a great possibility and look into it for the advantage or benefit. Now, the third step in dealing with any situation or challenge is to define it clearly. Define it clearly. Now, I use this method, by the way, all the time. I just simply take any goal or difficulty that I have, and I run it through this whole thing. And I run it down, and I just go through the analysis, and I always come out at the end with a solution. Define it clearly. Think on paper. Do it in writing. Think on paper. All successful people think on paper. Unsuccessful people don't think on paper. Why don't unsuccessful people think on paper? Because they're too lazy to think on paper. Think on paper. Write it down. Say, what is it that I'm worried about? What is the difficulty? What is the situation? And define it clearly. Remember we said before, a hallmark of genius is clarity. A hallmark of failure is fuzziness. Number 4 is ask yourself, what are all the possible causes? What are all the possible causes? The natural tendency in our impatient society is for us to, if we get to the point of defining the difficulty or the challenge, is to leap to a conclusion and say, let's do this. Instead, what a doctor does, for instance, is a doctor steps back and says, all right, you have this pain, you have this difficulty, you have this ailment that's being manifested in these symptoms. Now, let's look at what all the possible causes may be. What do you eat? What do you drink? What is your lifestyle like? What sort of stresses exist in your life, and so on. Sometimes you'll find that 50% of all of your difficulties can be resolved by defining them clearly. Another 25% of your difficulties can be resolved by determining the causes. Sometimes if you can determine what the causes are, then you say, well, if that's the cause, then you eliminate the cause. The situation is resolved. The 5th step, if you have not resolved it at step 3 or step 4, the next step is you say, what are all the possible solutions? What are all the possible solutions? Now, not just the logical solutions, but go beyond that. If you come up with a solution very quickly that seems like the logical solution, then ask yourself, what if that didn't work? Then what else would we do? The Roger Von Oak says, always look for what is called the second right answer. Once you have one right answer, and you say, well, this looks like the answer to this difficulty, ask yourself, what is the second right answer? Very, very good exercise, because if the first solution doesn't work, you've already got a second solution already developed. So you ask, what are all the possible solutions? What is the solution? What's the opposite of the solution? What if we just did nothing? What if we did it twice as hard? What if we tried something else completely? What if we used lateral thinking? And instead of trying to dig this hole deeper, we went and dug another hole. What if we got out of this market completely? What if we got out of this job or this relationship completely? Rather than trying to solve the job or the relationship, what if we went somewhere else and started over? What would be the second right answer? Now, here's a critical point. From this point onward, once you've gotten to number 5, think and talk only about the solutions. Think and talk only about the solutions. You see, because of the law of concentration, because of the law of substitution, because of the law of attraction, what happens? Well, I'll tell you what happens. Most people talk about the problems all the time. They think about the problems, they worry about the problems, they vividly imagine the problems, they discuss the problems, and they have more and more and more problems. The law of substitution says if you think and talk about the problems, your mind is going to become preoccupied with negativity. The law of attraction says if you think and talk about the problems, you're going to attract more problems into your life. The law of correspondence says that the more you think and talk about problems, the more they preoccupy your mind, the more your external world is going to be characterized by problems. The difference between winners and losers, heroes and non-heroes, successes and failures is this, is that successful people, winners, are solution-oriented. They are solution-oriented. They think about the solutions. They talk about the solutions. They're always asking this question. Here is the big question. What do we do from here? What can we do from here? In other words, they are always future-oriented, always oriented toward the future. Losers are always oriented toward the past. Losers always want to know who did it, who's to blame, who's responsible, how do we cut our losses. The winner always looks forward and says, where do we go from here? What do we do from here? What's the solution from here? How can we improve this situation? How can we adjust, adapt, modify, and so on? Once you get here, the next step is pretty simple. Number 6 is make a decision. Make a decision. Now, any decision is better than no decision. 80% of all difficulties should be resolved, and the decision should be made at this step, at exactly the time that they come up. In other words, whenever you have a difficulty, now is the time to make 80% of your decisions. Indecision, by the way, indecisiveness is a major reason for failure. Indecisive people don't succeed in life. Being decisive is more important than being correct, because the more decisions that you make, the more feedback you get, the smarter you become, the more accurate your decisions become. The fewer decisions you make, the less feedback you get, the less learning takes place, the poorer a decision maker you become. So make a decision. Remember, 80% should be made right now, and the others can be made simply by saying, All right, I can't make the decision now. I need more information. I'll set a deadline. Thursday at noon, I'll make the decision no matter what information I have. Number 7, by the way, this is a great tension reliever. Great tension relievers make decisions. Indecisiveness is a major source of stress. Number 7 is assign responsibility. Assign responsibility. In other words, ask yourself this question. This is the big question. Who is going to do it? Who is going to do it? Very often people will go through this exercise, they'll make the decision, they'll be happy, they'll be elated, the stress and difficulty is gone, and then they all go back to work and they come back to a meeting 2 weeks later and nothing has been done because nobody has been assigned specific, and that's probably the word, assigned specific responsibility. Who is going to do what exactly? And that brings us to number 8, set a deadline. Say, I want this done by such and such a day. Well, let's agree that it's going to be done by such and such a day, Thursday, 12 o'clock noon, we will review it again. And of course, once you've set a deadline, number 9 is take action. Launch. You know, an interesting time management study I read recently says that 20% of the work, the first 20% usually accounts for 80% of the value of the job. If you can launch it, they say well begun is half done. And number 10 is inspect what you expect. Inspect what you expect. One of the most important rules of success in life is once you have made an agreement that something is going to be done, inspect it. Check on it. Control it. Monitor it. Keep in touch. I have a good friend that says that delegation is essential, but not abdication. Make a decision. Once you have assigned somebody, you've asked somebody to do it, keep in touch with them. If it's important enough for you to have it done by that deadline, it's important enough for you to follow up and check.